This is a production of Cornell University.
Thank you, Libby. Oh, the mic is on. I was gonna ask. So it was really fun. Gillian said, "Hey, do you want to give a seminar about what you did on sabbatical?" And I thought, wow, that sounds pretty fun. So this is let's see. This is not, you can't read it if you're in the room. Oh, over there. The amazing research that past and present students, postdoc staff have done in the lab. This is not that seminar. They're taking nothing away from their work, which is amazing. But this is really a seminar about what I've been doing for the last year and the surprising things I've learned. And I think the importance of going somewhere else and essentially walking in someone else's shoes. So I think we left Geneva. My lab is on the Geneva campus. And we left Geneva with a pickup truck, a dog, a husband, a U-Haul trailer that was exclusively filled with toys, bikes and whatnot, skis. And then I drove my car. Actually, all the skis were on top of my car. We left in August of 22. I think we left about the 10th. And it took us 2.5 days to drive across the country. And we landed in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is an hour north of Denver, the home of Colorado State University. I was hosted by the amazing Jan Leach, who many of you know is a member of the National Academy of Sciences and just a remarkable person. But we all thought it was hilarious that she loved always standing next to the biohazard sign. Jan, until very recently, was the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Agricultural Sciences at Colorado State. And now she stepped down from that administrative role and is continuing to run her lab as a university distinguished professor. So I was in the Department of, as I said, Agricultural Biology, which was interesting. I'll describe the department in a minute. But the goals for my sabbatical were to learn about the department and the research. I knew I would be learning a lot about bacterial-plant interactions, which interests me, a focus of Jan's research, microbiome research, the impact of climate change. That was all some of what happened. Again, not what I'm talking about today. To gain a better understanding of disease issues in Colorado, to learn about, I knew, oh, the West is very dry. So to learn about agriculture in water limited areas and to write some grants, which again, is not the topic of today, but I did write, I think I wrote 9 grants and some of them were awarded. So in the Department of Agricultural Biology, alumnus Amy Charkowski is the chair. She got her PhD with Alan Comer in the graduate field of plant pathology and plant-microbe biology. And Amy works on bacterial diseases of potato. So we've known each other forever. And it was really fun interacting with Amy. Amy is actually transitioning out of chair of the department and into the associate dean of research role for the college. So kudos to Amy. In the Department of Ag Biology, the folks that are there are the plant pathologists, entomologists, and weed scientists with some portion of the plant genetics faculty there as well. So in some respects, it's like SIPs in that groups that were previously departments had been combined together, but in some respects very different because the focus was really on pest management, whether it was weeds, pathogens, or insects. So that was interesting. The first thing you need to learn when you go somewhere new is how do these folks network? So there are 28, I'm not even kidding, 28 microbreweries within the city of Fort Collins, Colorado, which has 150,000 people. So pretty much every activity that was not on campus was at a microbrewery, and you could go to a different one every week. And let me also say that none of those microbreweries brew light beer. So my idea of we're going to go and exercise and I'm going to lose 10 pounds, no. And the other thing is that there's so many group exercise activities. And in part, that's because there's 300 days of sun. And when people talk, I mean, they're like, oh, what's the first thing you notice as a difference between Fort Collins and Ithaca? And I'm like, it's really sunny here. And they're like, what do you mean? And, we don't have 300 days of sun. So there's always opportunities to get together with groups of people, whether it's hiking in the winter or in the fall or the spring. They have a 4-mile turkey trot, which the entire department participates in. And so there's just a lot of activities that really surround being outside because the weather really permits that. So when I was at Colorado State, I was asked to give a seminar where I did, in fact, talk about the science that happens in my lab. And as some of you know, some of that science involves a pathogen called Phytophthora capsicum. And to research that pathogen, we have a 9-acre farm. And so I was talking about our research and I was talking about this farm. And I said to the group at Colorado State, one of the things I really love about this slide is that you can see the drain tiles. So this field is very wet, but to enable us to grow crops on this field, the drain tiles are there, and you can really see them clearly. And Colorado, actually, one thing I loved about the seminars in Colorado was that people would just sort of ask questions as you were talking. And both Jan and Amy are like, hey, Chris, why don't you explain drain tiles? And I'm confident that my face went, huh? And Jan's like, we don't have those here. Wow. It was that moment mid-seminar of, I am no longer in New York. So I went on to explain that Geneva, New York has a drain tile museum, which everybody thought was absolutely hilarious. And the importance of drain tiles to agriculture east of the Mississippi. So after that, conversations between students and whomever, it was always like, so really you guys want to take the water away? And I'm like, we could not grow crops if we did not take the water away. And it turned into this incredible learning experience for me. While I had spent 4 years at UC Davis, when I was there, I was working on fruit trees and it was flood irrigated, and the concept of where is the water coming from at that time, it just wasn't part of our conversation. And so a lot of the conversations in Colorado surround water. And if you were to ask a grower in New York, what is their biggest issue? They're going to say labor. A lot of our crops are hand harvested. Labor is a huge issue. Every single grower or rancher in the state of Colorado will say water. Every single one. So again, it was this really interesting difference. So Fort Collins is here. Oh, I should use this, having seen many a seminar on Zoom. Fort Collins is here. And Colorado State, under its agricultural experiment station, has 10 research centers across the state of Colorado. The closest one being about 40 minutes away. And the furthest ones, well, this is not the furthest by distance, but it takes about 7.5, 8 hours to get there, because you can't just go from there to there. I'm not going to be talking about it today, but one of the really unique things that Colorado State has recently built is the Spur campus, which is right in Denver. And plant pathologist that some of you might know, Jim Burdine, he was the former chair of plant pathology at the University of Minnesota, is actually the dean of that campus. And it's really completely geared toward getting the general public engaged in agriculture. and there's an entire kitchen, there's a sensory panel, there's a hydroponic system, and they really find ways to bring the community in. Additionally, in Colorado, the largest sector of agriculture is cattle. The largest beef slaughterhouses are in Colorado, the largest, and so much of the plant agriculture is associated with growing food for cattle. So on the eastern side of the state, over here, well, at least part of this eastern side, what you'll see predominantly is cattle. And then maize and alfalfa that are grown to feed the cattle. So those are several interesting angles. The first research center that I went to was in the San Luis Valley. And this is a fascinating valley surrounded by mountains, and I'll have pictures of those mountains in a second, but right down here, because the valley is so dry, it's at 8,000 feet, and it's the highest in elevation of the research centers. And the winds come across from west to east, and there's a giant national park called Sand Dunes National Park, which is an absolutely fascinating place to visit. So I first, actually, I didn't end up getting to San Luis Valley until maybe late April. And this is what the valley looked like. The research center is here. The valley is surrounded to the east by the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and to the west by the San Luis Mountains. So it's really quite amazing when you're standing looking in one direction and then you turn around and look the other way. Yeah, the soil is much more gravelly on one side, on the eastern side of the valley, and less gravelly on the western side of the valley. So what did I do when I visited the San Luis Valley? Well, I learned about quinoa, you guys. We don't grow quinoa here. So quinoa is a crop that's from the high altitude Andes, and it grows really well in the San Luis Valley of Colorado. And an entomologist friend of mine, Ada Chapaniak, it's really easy to say, but it looks hard. She has a project. There's a stem boring insect that will bore into the stem of the quinoa plants, cause the stem to collapse, and growers will lose yield. So I went up with her when they were planting one of their quinoa trials, and I met several of the quinoa growers who are absolutely amazing. They have a product, Colorado quinoa, that is branded. And I learned also that there are different colors of quinoa seed. I was not a quinoa aficionado, and the white quinoa is the highest value. So in case you're at the store wondering why white quinoa costs more than red or brown, and I asked if it tastes different, and it was great. You can tell when you're not versed in a crop. So I'm like, oh, well, does it taste different? And all four of these folks looked at me and were like, well, no. I don't know. But as I was traveling with Ada, she's like, there's some kind of mildew disease of quinoa that's a real problem. And I'm like, I work on mildews. And in fact, in many locations, downy mildew caused by Peronospora variabilis is the limiting factor to quinoa production. On the right-hand side of the slide, this is one of Ada's field trials. Quinoa is planted very close together, and it requires very little water, even to germinate. So on the left-hand side, I did all this research on downy mildew, and so then we went out there, and I'm like, so, do you guys ever see downy mildew? And they're like, again, we get 8 inches of precipitation annually in the San Luis Valley. And they're like, do you think we get downy mildew? I'm like, no. So downy mildew is a water mold that really thrives in wet and high humidity environments. The humidity here is, probably about 12%. And as I said, they get 8 inches of precipitation. All of their irrigation comes from groundwater aquifers. I'll show in a minute, but they get diverted water from the Rio Grande or the Arkansas rivers. Colorado is the headwater of 8 major river systems. And so they get water through irrigation ditches, but they use that water to soak into the ground to replenish the aquifer. Then everything in the valley is irrigated from groundwater. Potatoes are among the largest commodity crops in the San Luis Valley, and especially seed potatoes, which you're going to want to grow in an area that's very isolated so you don't get pathogens that could be transmitted into those seed potatoes. And so the San Luis Valley is a really important seed potato production area as well, also irrigated. The other thing we went to the San Luis Valley for was to look at hemp. So this is a field of hemp that had just been harvested. This hemp was harvested. That's maybe a 3-inch, 4-inch stubble on the ground, and then the stems lay in the ground redding. So these stems here are all redding. During the season, this would have been irrigated. It's a crop circle. It would have been irrigated using pivot irrigation. Most of the pivot irrigation circles in the San Luis Valley are 220 acres. So there's a center pivot that's metered. You only get a certain amount of water. And then this was really fascinating. The irrigation technology is such that the sprinklers that come down from the pivot irrigation move depending on the height of the crop to ensure that you get maximum water to the soil rather than losing it to the air. So here at Cornell, we also have a hemp program, and it was really fun to visit there because we were in the process of purchasing what's called a decorticator from Formation Ag, which is in the San Luis Valley. So a decorticator is a machine that basically smashes the hemp stems, and it separates the bast fibers, which are on the outside of the hemp, from the really hard hurd fibers on the inside of the hemp. And you can see this is a decorticator in action here. And this is what extremely clean outer fibers look like. The outer fibers can be used, sometimes they're used in things like insulations, but they can also be used for fabrics. And then the inner hurd is used as animal bedding. So all of the hemp in the fiber production is used. And so we got to see that whole process. So just yesterday, this is hot off the press, Corbett, who I showed in this earlier slide, that's Corbett, head of Formation Ag. Corbett drove Cornell's new hemp decorticator from the San Luis Valley in Colorado to Geneva, New York for our hemp field day tomorrow. So you can see here that he brought a bale of hemp stems because he honestly didn't trust that we would have like the proper bale to show everyone how well it worked. So it's a good call. So this is the bale unwinder, and then the hemp stems will go into this, which is the decorticator, which will smash it up. Then it moves into this machine where the longest bast fibers are separated out. This is the control panel for the entire thing. Then you move over here, and what you're actually doing on this side of the decortication process is separating the inner hurd pieces into different sizes because different sizes will be used for different products. So our decorticator is on a trailer. So Department of Ag and Markets in New York hopes that Cornell will pull this trailer around the state and show the promise of using hemp for fiber in rotation with other field crops. So that was a really fun connection.
Can I ask,
Please.
so how expensive is such a machine?
$400,000.
So is the idea for a grower that they have to collectivize or something, or they come to you, or how does that?
Yeah, so well, ideally, there would be enough interest in growers that processors would move into the state. And so there would be a processing facility within 50 miles, and then people would bring their bales, drop them there, and they would be processed as if it were grain. But then the processors don't want to come unless they know they're going to have enough growers, and the growers don't want to grow unless they know they can sell it.
And is most of the production in your fiber, what is it?
Right, so Susan's question was, is most hemp production for fiber, or is it for other things? For 4 years ago, it would have been predominantly for the CBD market, which has completely crashed. And so right now, there's actually very little hemp grown, particularly with high THC cannabis market coming online. But there is a lot of interest in fiber and grain, and some of the hemp you can actually harvest both the grain that could potentially be fed to animals as well as the fiber. So one of the amazing things that I got to do was Jan Leach and Amy Charkowski teach a course called Colorado Ag Systems. And in that course, you visit each of the 10 research centers across the state. And I learned an incredible amount while riding on. Let me tell you, Colorado State has really nice buses in their fleet. Wi-Fi was great. So the course was composed of graduate students from across campus, upper level undergrads, and then faculty that were interested. The chair of chemical engineering came along, mechanical engineering, because so much of the focus is on irrigation technology and agrivoltaics, both of which are really taking off in Colorado, that engineering is going to be a key component of that moving forward. And visitors are allowed to come along as well. And I'm just throwing this out there to tell people, I would love to figure out how we could have this class here. It was a great cohort building experience for the students on the bus, and you know, you're on the bus so long that at some point everybody ends up getting to know everyone else, and it was really amazing. The other thing that I hadn't really thought about before we started visiting each of these centers is how important it was to the faculty and staff that were at these centers to have the students and, you know, folks from Fort Collins come and visit there and show interest and realize the importance of the work that each of those places are doing. So that was really cool. And let me say, it's extremely expensive. At Colorado State, they spent $25,000. They got $15,000 from the college and $10,000 from the university. What do you think our chances are, guys? But
We
yep.
have a new digital ag minor now that is across all universities, and those students will be a draw.
Yeah.
And wanting for grads, but maybe just extend the digital ag.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's that same concept of where is agriculture moving in the future? What do we need? And it's absolutely connected to workforce development. Gillian? Oh, thought you were going to chime in with a $10,000. So this was also really, really interesting to me. So as I mentioned earlier, in Eastern Colorado, it's about cattle. And I had never, I guess I probably should have, but in my life, I had never visited a research facility that was really focused on animal research. That we tend to segregate plant research and animal research. And learning about the ways in which you do cattle research. You have to have, identical genetics across fairly large groups of cattle to get the numbers you need to do the statistics. And how do they do that? How do they decide what goes into the feed? So in this particular study, they were studying methane responses in cattle, the amount of methane that was produced predominantly through burping, which is the greatest methane producer, depending on the different feed. And so learning about that was really fascinating. And a person who is completely integrated with the research is Temple Grandin. And many of you may have heard of her because of her work, highlighting that neurodiverse people and autistic people can very much contribute to the greater good, as well as she designed cattle chutes so that as cattle were going to be slaughtered or to be moved from one location to another, it would keep the anxiety level lower. So animal husbandry, really. And it was really interesting to meet her. I'm not going to talk about each of the stations, but one that I do want to highlight is called the Plainsman Research Center. And just below this is the panhandle of Oklahoma. And just to this side is Kansas. So you're 20 miles from one and 15 miles from the other. And it was part of the Dust Bowl in that whole area of Oklahoma. This corner of Colorado was part of the Dust Bowl. And I had never visited an area that had soil, and as everyone said, what we currently choose to call soil, that was anything similar to this. So I had never been in a place where I could see that far to the horizon, which was also really, really amazing. And it seemed, in some of the pictures that I show, you'll see it seemed windy, and I was like, wow, it's really windy here. And they're like, this is a normal day. So 1 in 3 years, growers in this area will get a crop. And if they get a crop 1 in 3 years, they're happy. The growers in the area, CSU was going to close this research center, and the growers in the area actually put in money to keep that research area going because they feel it's so critical to their survival, which again was really, really interesting. This trip was in the end of May, and you'll see that there's not a lot of green here. It was a rough spring. So some of the things that I learned, they had a trial that was really interesting. They're looking at and continue over many years to look at the height at which corn is combined, and to try to determine if, what height can you still get a decent yield of the maize and have a larger stalk to prevent the soil that you have from blowing across the Great Plains. That was really interesting. And you can't see it very well here, but these are actually little tiny sand dunes in the middle of the field that have come, they're waves. The field should be flat. The field was plowed flat, but because soil had blown into that area. And so this particular field, this was I've told this story to some of you, but the manager of the farm was like, yeah, this field here where you can see a little bit of green wheat coming up. Yeah, that field, it seemed we had the right amount of corn around it to protect the seed, but this field blew. I'm like, and the seed just blew away. Right? And he's like, yeah, this field is a real problem. It's blown 3 years in a row. Wow. It was absolutely fascinating. And he said, that for being here, that's part of what's expected, but those are the kinds of things that we really want to work on. The other thing that was very interesting about this location was that the state of Colorado is in some places paying farmers to put the land back into native buffalo grasses, which have a broader root system that hopefully could stabilize the soil. So we learned a lot about that, which was also very interesting. And this is my picture of the soil at the Plainsman Research Center. So it goes from mud to cracked concrete, they tell us. It's really, it was just remarkable to see that and really to think about what, the people were trying to live through in the Dust Bowl. It's just incredible. And the other thing I'll say is that that southeastern corner of Colorado is really very poverty stricken. Colorado is booming generally as a state. Yeah, I think every person we met had some connection to New York or California. Like the coasts are moving to Colorado, but this part of the state is very impoverished. And the reason is because there is no water. So this was new to me. I saw after we went to Plainsman, we went to what's called a diversion head. And here is the Rio Grande. And starting right there, a portion of the water gets diverted and comes off to go into irrigation canals. And this happens hundreds of times along the Colorado, the Rio Grande, the Arkansas, the Republican rivers. So this is, it looks, when you look at it, it looks like a river, but it's the head of the irrigation ditch. And so this was absolutely fascinating to me. The water laws and regulations that we learned about are amazing. And many of the laws are from when there was a gold rush in the 1800s, and those laws are still in place. And essentially, the first people that asked for water rights are the people that get the most water even today. And there is a list of hundreds of thousands of people that want water rights, and there's simply not enough water. So that was interesting. Water rights are private property, also interesting. And those diversion gates are owned by companies, which surprised me. I thought it would be a public venture, but they're owned by several different companies, and they're called ditch companies. And ditch companies manage all of the surface water irrigation systems across the state. And they have people there's a job called a ditch rider. And the ditch rider originally would have ridden a horse, but now predominantly actually rides motorcycles to maintain the ditch. And really, they're the ditch police, right? Nobody can take water from the ditch, which would be a real problem. And they're armed. So because water is so scarce, the ditch riders have a very serious job. They calculate water volumes, which is also interesting how water volumes are calculated. And they can enter private property without any permissions. So if an irrigation ditch, which several folks on the bus said this, they have irrigation ditches that run through their property. The ditch riders just come on and to check the ditch, make sure you're not stealing water, make sure, it is where the maintenance is what it needs to be. So I thought that was, for me, that was just something very different than anything I'd seen here in New York. Almost done. So the other side of Colorado is also very fascinating because there is more water, and that's really the difference. And Western Colorado is where they grow fruit. The land is extremely rocky, and so it's not prime ag land, but there is water, and there are fruit trees. Peaches are probably the largest in production area, but there's also pears, cherries, and they're trying to develop a grape industry, which is really tough because they can have really cold winters and really hot summers. I did see some disease. Cytospora canker, which is caused by several different species within the fungal genus Cytospora, is a huge issue on peach, especially when the winters get really cold. The trunks will crack because of the cold and then heating up with the bright sun, 300 days of sun, and that allows Cytospora canker to get into the trees. So I felt like I had a show. And the other interesting thing is that they have a large program about phylloxera in grapes. So this sign right here says stop. We have phylloxera on this field. We don't want to spread it across the state. Know that. So I thought it was interesting that they're focusing not only on how do we produce the grapes, but phylloxera, which has been in soils in most places that grow grapes in the world for 100 years, is new to Colorado, which is interesting. So the unique research that we were able to see, they have an entire facility for irrigation technology. As I said, agrivoltaics or having solar panels over agricultural fields is a huge and booming area. They are trying to bring in new crops. One of the crop that will bring the most growers the most money is alfalfa. And alfalfa is a fairly high water using crop. So in that, there are growers that grow alfalfa in the San Luis Valley where there's 8 inches average of precipitation a year, and alfalfa takes about 20. So it's not a good match. So they're looking for new crops. Workforce development is very high on the priority list of all of these research centers. They're bringing in students, they're bringing in, farmers and helping with successional planning, and that was really interesting. And they're trying to build, or I guess I would say rebuild relationships with indigenous communities in the state. So in addition to learning a lot about ag in Colorado, we of course met amazing people, and we got to see a lot of amazing sites in the state. We also got to enjoy the natural beauty of Colorado. So we saw so many elk, you guys. They're like so big. They're everywhere. This is a very it's a female actually of a bighorn sheep. So we saw males as well, but I didn't get a very good picture. Lots of antelope, which I found impossible to take a photo of. Mule deer, they don't have white-tailed deer, they have mule deer, which are larger, and bison. So these are all bison, including blonde bison. This just reminded me of the song, Home on the Range, right? So these vast open spaces. The flowers, so much different flora and fauna, which I expected, but when you see it, it just makes you happy. And then the hiking, whether it was in state parks, there are a really excellent system of state parks, or the national parks, really outstanding. And then thanks to everyone in SIPS who helped buy me an Epic Pass. So an Epic Pass enables you to ski, I think at 10 different ski locations across the state. And we made excellent use of the Epic Pass, let me say. It was absolutely fantastic. And even when, the weather wasn't great, we still had a blast. It was really wonderful. Thanks to my lab, which it didn't crumble and collapse. They kept it running while I'm away. I have this fear that they're like, oh, is she gonna leave again soon? But they really kept everything running. But we're happy to be home. I can't tell you guys how I was not expecting this. So happy to see that the plant science building was finally under renovation. That took years off my life, you guys. So it was really exciting to see. And as Libby said, I will be starting as director of Cornell Agritech in Geneva on October 1st. And this actually is a picture of Fort Collins from the top of a hike that we did quite a few times at a state park that you can look over. This is a reservoir, horse tooth reservoir, and that is Fort Collins. So with that, I'll answer any questions. Marvin.
What crops were they growing solar panels?
So Marvin asked what crops they were growing under the solar panels. They're at one of the research stations. They were looking at alfalfa and maize and barley. Coors actually tries to buy as much barley as they can from growers in the state. They were looking at the solar panels that were mobile, so it's not like you had complete shading of the sun. And then when we were on the west side of the state, they were in the process of building agrivoltaics over apples, which was really interesting. Libby?
How many of the stations across the state have students?
How many of the stations across the state have students? So all of the stations have projects where students from campus will go there and have part of their research there. But and most of them have places where the students can stay while they're there, but none of them have permanent full-time students at the station.
Is there, this might be like, but on the east side of the Colorado, there's like a bunch of land, it's just flat, it's very big. Is there any push for like greenhouse or like buildings that like help with the process?
Yeah, so the question was in eastern Colorado, is there any development of like a controlled environment ag industry? And to be honest, everywhere that we saw controlled environment ag industry, it was for cannabis. And I didn't really hear a lot of talk about, we did on the western side of the state, we saw a facility, an aquaponic facility, where they were growing both tilapia and lettuce, but not as much on the eastern side of the state. Most of the water is going into new housing developments.
How prevalent was enrollment in that like buffalo grass?
Oh, right. How prevalent was enrollment in the Department of Natural Resources Buffalo Grass Initiative? And at least from what we were told, initially there was a lot of enrollment, but then people would enroll in the program and then decide they wanted to farm again. So that became tricky. And especially as the soil started to stabilize, they would think, oh, well, now can I plow this in and farm again? And so they're actually the Colorado Department of Natural Resources taking a new tactic to try to, again, expand the program. So I think there are some farmers, but it's not hugely prevalent. One of the things that everyone asks is, what did you miss? And of course the people, but man, we miss sweet corn. It's not very humid there. And so you just don't get that juicy sweet corn so like the day we got back, we went to a farmer's market and got sweet corn.
My understanding of I guess the mood in upstate New York about converting land to have solar panels or maybe agrivoltaics, I don't know, is that farmers are not interested in switching land over. Going to Colorado, I'm curious what the drivers are for people being interested in switching to agrivoltaics. If you think that there's
Right. So the question is, what's the driver and interest for agrivoltaics? And let me say that in Colorado, the majority, there are huge solar fields, and in part because of the amount of sun. But right in the public, there's not a lot of agrivoltaics. But at research stations, the hope is that they can show successful harvest, no decline, no economic decline, plus enhancing energy. I'll say they're also down near that Plainsman station, vast wind turbine fields. And I think the same will be true here in New York. I mean, there are research endeavors to see how well agrivoltaics could work here as well. And I think that as growers can see, oh, this is going to work or this isn't going to work, that's going to help them make that decision.
Say more about that. Travel course around the station, like when's it offer? Is it credit?
Yeah. So the travel course, I'm glad you're interested, Marvin. I'm going to be trying to wrangle folks in. Yeah, so it's for credit, but it actually happens right after the spring semester ends. So it was like May 15th until June 7th. And you went to those places over the course of 3-ish weeks. The students enroll, they get credit. There were assignments that they had to do. And I don't think it was too taxing. They seemed to enjoy it. There were readings. And there weren't the instructors were always hoping that there would be more students in the course than there were. But given the time of year, a lot of students that have field projects want to be out getting things planted in the ground. And so they were trying to figure out that balance of timing versus not. For us, that timing would be tough because then, the summer tuition and but I feel like we could figure out how to make it work. And particularly if we could find a campus-wide angle, I think that would be really fun.
I have to do it in New York State in a couple of shorter outbacks.
Yeah.
Because in Digital Lab right now, we're doing field trips, like we were just in Geneva last week, and we also visit large farms. And then, I think the conversation between the research component of Cornell and the actual grower experience brings students more into contact with and helps, I think, develop. Among the students, a lot of the students are themselves from farms, so they want to see it from their perspective.
Yeah, and that's exactly how this worked. I think there were 5 or 6 different trips.
And that seems more doable.
Yep.
Because if we don't do it during the semester, the undergrads can't take advantage of it.
Exactly.
But the value is in the digital lab course that we have quite a few engineers, computer scientists who are members of digital lab. So it's a lot of really good interactions. The Q&A always on site is dynamic because the students from these different backgrounds ask really interesting questions that maybe from your own discipline.
Yeah, for sure. And I know we have to go, Gillian. But I will say that, I talked to the folks in Colorado about if we could get this established, it would be fantastic to have some of our students have the opportunity to go and take the course in Colorado and some folks from Colorado to come here because it's just so different. I mean, I'm telling the students about, we have this station in Long Island, and they're like, aren't there a lot of people? I'm like, yes. So I think building those bridges between such different agricultural systems would be really, really fun.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.